The race is on, and Max Verstappen took his third consecutive win at the weekend, but this time it was in a GT3 Ferrari on the Nürburgring Nordschleife. But how did he do it, and what does it mean for his racing future? I'm Ed Straw, and joining me to reveal all are Scott Mitchell-Malm and Matt Beer. Well, welcome back, Scott. We've talked about many Max Verstappen victories on this podcast, but how impressive was his win at the weekend in the Nürburgring Endurance Series on the Nordschleife?
Yeah, very impressive. Thank you for the welcome back. It's funny, having been away for a couple of weeks, I'm sort of wondering what year I've returned in that Max Verstappen's won 3 races in a row, 3 weekends in a row. In a way, this I wrote something along these lines after his victory, in that he's almost doing more this year to enhance his reputation than he would be if he was just winning another championship. I find it so impressive. We'll get into that, the sort of bigger picture element a little bit more, but just even on the sort of like micro level for just what he's done this weekend. Look, yes, he's a world-class driver. He's probably the best F1 driver around at the moment, and therefore probably one of, if not the best racing driver in the world. So should be pretty good if he turns up to what is ultimately a national GT series. But the Nordschleife is the Nordschleife. It's a specialist circuit, and there are people that will race on there that, you know, it's like the ultimate home track where knowledge and experience is an advantage. Plus, you know, you have to have the right team, the right car, the right teammate. You have to have circumstances go in your favour to even if it's only 4 hours versus 24 hours. You need all of those things as well. But I just think some of the, you know, I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert in what Max did at the weekend, but even just like the basic elements of it, you know, with his stint work going from third to first at the start, building a lead of over a minute. I think his fastest lap was on like his third lap of his first stint, which was only a couple of seconds off the lap record in that category and series. So just it's that, yes, the overall result is amazing, and you kind of almost expect it from Verstappen to just rock up somewhere and win. I just like the fact that even the sort of smaller details within it, like he's not gone there just to win it. He's gone there to have fun. But Max's version of having fun is to go there and just be bloody brilliant.
And of course, Matt, he's had to go through quite a lot of rigmarole in order to be able to do this, because he had to do the previous race in the detuned GT4 Porsche, didn't he, to get the permit, etc. So this isn't just a turn up on a whim. He's had to put serious legwork into doing this.
This is one of the lovely things about it. He's gone through such a process and gone through it with like humility and willingness. As reigning multiple F1 world champion, if anyone had a right to rock up to Nürburgring and go, can you just let me drive the car? I'm obviously qualified to drive a racing car. Can you just let me do it? It would be Max. To be honest, probably any F1 driver with current race wins could maybe have a crack at that. But he went through the whole process, including like an online course, having to do a certain number of, not just a certain number of laps. He should have started the previous race in 2 different cars. He did get a waiver for that because the second car he was supposed to use was crashed at the start by someone else. But he had to do that first race in a GT4 Porsche detuned, so it was 125 horsepower down on everything he was competing against. It's a little bit reminiscent of the rookie orientation program that any driver has to go through before doing the Indianapolis 500. Even Fernando Alonso had to prove that he could lap, I think it's like in the 190 mile an hour range before being allowed above 200, then just going up in increments. And the idea of an F1 driver having to do that on even the Indianapolis Motor Speedway seems a little bit over the top if to outsiders sometimes. But it's also, as well as like a license requirement, it's part of the proper respect for the event and the racetrack. And when Max talked over the Baku weekend about having done this first Nürburgring race to get his permit in the GT4 car, the thing it wasn't like at any point he talked the process down. He actually just kept saying how nice everyone was to him and how willing he'd been to go through everything that he had to go through. I love the fact there was an e-learning course involved, like a kind of driving theory test for the Nordschleife that he had to do first. But he's doing this just because he really wants to, and he'll do whatever's involved in it. And I just find that so admirable.
Yeah, and it's important to note that is a track that has a number of esoteric rules and certain bits of driving etiquette. You have to respect that track because of the safety issue. So there's very, very good reasons for this. It wasn't about anything other than just making sure it's safe and people know what they're doing. And you'd expect Verstappen to be able to do that. But yeah, he absolutely shouldn't get special treatment. But Scott, I guess in terms of putting into context this achievement, we don't want to overstate how strong the field was, because this isn't the strongest field that'll race on that circuit this year. There was some big GT3 names absent and big teams inevitably. Obviously, the Fuji Wet race was going on. But it also wasn't a field of nobodies. Frank Stippler has won, I think, the Nürburgring 24 Hours 3 times, raced there a lot. He finished second in the end. So, there is some proper opposition there. So it wasn't simply turn up and pot hunt. He still did have to show he could drive in order to establish that kind of lead that he did early on.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like Max turned up and rocked around at 90% and that was still just enough to beat a bunch of, club racers. That's not how it works. Like I said earlier, with the way the Nordschleife is, anyone that runs at the front, even of the national series rather than the 24 hours proper, is going to be very, very good. It's for me, it's the sort of kind of crushing nature of that stint, and also just the outright pace, the sort of proximity to record setting pace, and that, like, you got the impression that Max wasn't taking it easy, and it wasn't kind of showing off. It was just, building on the point that Matt was saying before about it's admirable that he's gone about this the right way, but I think one of the reasons he's gone about it the right way is because this is like proper bucket list stuff for him. This is something that he's just been so keen to do. He has done thousands and thousands, if not, has he done maybe 1 million Nordschleife laps in sim racing across the years? And he's finally out there properly in an actual race in a GT3 car. Like, I just don't think you can hold back Max Verstappen in that situation. And when you do that, you run the risk of a mistake. He could have made a mistake. His teammate Chris Lullum could have made a mistake. Like, it could have gone wrong. And that's, I think, what is so impressive. You can kind of park the fact that it wasn't, the most stellar in-depth field. It wasn't over 24 hours. Just like, take it for what it is. It's not Fernando Alonso turning up and trying to win the Indy 500 or anything like that. You don't need to overplay it to really understand, one, how rare it is that he's doing it, and two, how impressive it is that he's able to just rock up and be that fast. It shows how seriously he took it.
I mean, Scott, you mentioned Stippler, who was effectively his main rival in the race. Okay, Stippler at 50 years old. He's 23 years older than Verstappen. But that means he was racing at the Nürburgring Nordschleife when Max was a baby. He was a Porsche racer in the late 90s and then a consistent GT front runner ever since, with loads and loads and loads and loads of Nordschleife experience, a very serious opponent. And like you say about Max not kind of showboating, not showing off, I actually like the fact he only led by a second and a half after the first lap, and then he actually just builds his pace. And you can see it's hard to judge sometimes because you have the code 60 slow zones. It's a 25-kilometer track, so there's like yellows at certain parts. You've got over 100 cars in the field. Some of them are effectively road car spec in the lower classes. You've got the pit strategies coming in and out as well, and where people are on that front. So it gets harder to judge pace. It's not like he was consistently X seconds per lap faster than anyone else. But I think his fastest race lap was 4.5 seconds faster than anybody else managed, which, obviously huge margin, less so around an 8-minute lap, but still really, 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 really impressive. But yeah, that wasn't exactly a muted start. He dived into the lead at the first corner, but he built his pace up sensibly. That I liked that steadiness. I thought that showed a really good approach to the race.
There was something so sim racing about the way the first sort of 15 seconds of that played out as well. You just you kind of knew, because it's Max. I kind of seeing the replay of the start, because I wasn't able to watch it live, but watching it back, I just remember thinking, there's no way he's not leading out of turn one here. I can just see it. It's so obvious. You can visualize how late he's going to be on the brakes here. He's going to have the confidence. He's going to get it done. And then just a little bit of chaos behind. Yeah. And I can absolutely imagine, because I've seen a few of Max's streams when he's doing iRacing and stuff like that. And you obviously always have like the virtual mirror and you can see it. And there's so many times he comes out of turn one after doing an aggressive move past everybody else and then just watch everybody else kind of twat into each other. And like, he just ends up laughing. And I wonder if he afforded himself like a small chuckle, but given the sort of gravity of the situation and the length of the task ahead, I suspect even Max was sort of quite focused at that point. I just thought there was something so symmetrical, given sort of where he's come from and where his affection and sincere enthusiasm for the Nordschleife comes from, that it played out the way it did, because you could just imagine that happening in an iRacing lobby.
I should correct myself as well. I said Stippler finished second. He ran second, but the two Mustangs ended up changing around. So it was the car with Mardenborough in it, in fact, that finished second with a Stippler car. Third, but point still stands. Pulling away from someone like Stippler early on is an impressive feat. And it just reflects how Verstappen does things, doesn't he? The sheer depth of enthusiasm it takes to do this and to prepare properly and to just devote the amount of time he will have done into doing this speaks well just to his his desire to drive, doesn't it, Matt? I always remember him being asked a few years ago what he'll do after F1. He said, I'll just get a Porsche and just drive it every day, just trying to get quicker. And just that pure love of driving, I think everybody should celebrate seeing that in a driver of that greatness.
Well, this is the thing about what Max is doing. You could easily compare it to Fernando Alonso's exploits when he went racing and everything else he possibly could. Well, no, that's not true. Racing and everything that was big, high profile, famous, Triple Crown, all the big stuff, Dakar, Le Mans, Indy 500. Yeah, that was.
He didn't turn up in the 750 Motor Club at Mallory Park, though.
No, exactly. He could have done a lot more racing if he'd just entered more clubbies. But yeah, that was a quest for Alonso. It was at a time in his F1 career when F1 was not exactly passing him by, but he'd put himself in a career cul-de-sac, and some of his peers were going to have at least twice the number of titles he was going to be stuck on, and he had to do something else to prove he was the greatest. And absolute fair play to him for doing what he did at Indy, Le Mans, and even more so trying Dakar, which was never really going to be a big success. I thought that was in some ways the most endearing and impressive part of what he did. But Max is doing this because he really, really loves driving and just wants to go and drive racing cars somewhere fun as a hobby, basically. I don't think any part of this is him thinking about how he'll be remembered or his CV or anything. I'm not sure a lot of what Max does has anything to do with that. He just likes driving racing cars fast and doing some close racing. And this is a cool track, a pretty cool car. It's a chance for him to do it. And I think that is whatever else he does, and I'm sure we'll talk plenty about what this means for where he goes next. I think that's going to remain at the heart of it. It's not about chasing the trophy. It's about what can I do that I'm really going to enjoy.
Yeah, there was that quote from Alonso before he did Indy. When it was announced, he said, well, to be the greatest, you can either win 7 world championships or 8 world championships like Schumacher, which I can't do, or you can win in lots of disciplines. So he was absolutely thinking that. But you're right. I don't think Max thinks that's way. This is just part of Max Verstappen doing what Max Verstappen does. I'm sure if nobody is looking, nobody even knew he did it. He'd have done it anyway, and he'd probably preferred it that way because obviously huge crowd attention on this one. Well, Matt, we talked about the amount of dedication it takes from Verstappen to do this, but also he's involved with a team as well. Obviously, it was running under the Verstappen banner, as it were. His teammate Chris Lulham is part of the Verstappen Racing stable, if you like, a driver who sort of came from sim racing as well, but also had done karting before that as well. So he's part of that Verstappen kind of push to help these sorts of drivers into racing. So this has to tell us quite a bit about Verstappen's racing future, doesn't it? The fact he's getting involved in teams, both sim racing and real world, the fact he's racing himself. So where does this all go?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to underline how seriously Verstappen takes his racing team, relatively. There's plenty of cases over the years of an F1 driver lending their name or their brand to something that their management or an affiliate is running and probably never really paying any attention to what is happening to that racing team under their name. I'm not going to mention any examples, but I can think of a Formula BMW and Formula 3 team and an Extreme E team that probably didn't ever see a lot of their respective world champions they were named after. But in this case, and also I'm just going to throw in that there is a bit of chat about Verstappen's management team buying a MotoGP team at some point. As far as I understand, that's like a maybe rather than it's going to happen. I suspect Max won't be ultra involved in that one, but this GT thing is different. This is a proper passion project for him, and it is about this link between sim racing and real world racing and bringing people like Chris Lulham through, giving them these chances. Verstappen's got so much respect for the people he races with at Red Line when he's doing sim racing, and he wants them to experience the real world stuff as well. Lulham and Thierry Vermeulen, who's the son of Verstappen's manager Raymond, raced for the Verstappen team in GT World Challenge Europe. They've had a podium finish this year. Car's actually run by Emile Frey Racing, leading GT team. So, but Verstappen, as far as we understand, actually keeps a really close eye on what's going on, gives advice, wants to know how that team is doing, and has decent ambitions for it and the drivers he's looking after through it. So this is a vehicle for him to do more of this kind of thing. He's been very open about the fact that the proper Nürburgring 24 hours is his immediate goal. That fits into the F1 calendar next year. That slots nicely into the gap between, I think, Miami and Canada in May. GT World Challenge, where his team races, has a Spa 24 hours too. I suspect Max would really fancy that, but that's an F1 clash next year, so that is certainly off the agenda. Le Mans, a little bit down the road as well. He's been very clear that he fancies Le Mans, but this is, again, when we talk about people wanting to race outside F1 and go everywhere, that is not the case for Verstappen. Verstappen is interested in endurance racing specifically because that's the area where he sees that he can do the kind of stuff he wants to do. I guess he could go rallying if he fancies. His dad, Jos, won the Belgian Rally Championship at the weekend as well and has done loads of rallying this year. So they've got a rally car kicking around too. I don't think that's on Max's agenda, but I think him turning up in this GT car and taking this GT team higher is definitely on the cards for him. And also, it's not like because he's won this one NLS race, he's like, right, Nürburgring 24 hours next, let's go. He said at the end of the race, he'll do more NLS races between now and then to prepare for that. So he's actually ready to do it properly.
Yeah, he wants to get more experience, and that goes for him, that goes for the team, that goes for his teammate, how they want to do things. You're right that the next year's 24 hours fits in really nicely. I think there are other clashes in terms of more NLS rounds, and there's a qualifying race as well, isn't there, for the Nürburgring 24 hours? I think those clash. There's one this year that doesn't, I think. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him race there again before this year's over. And then it's really going to be about how he thinks he can go about it sort of as best as possible. Who knows, maybe the competitiveness or lack thereof with the Red Bull and quote unquote Ford package in 2026 is going. I don't think we're going to have Alonso style. Well, this is just an absolute McLaren Honda disaster. I'm just going to skip F1 races to go and fulfill my other desires. I don't think he's going to do that to tick off Le Mans in the short term, but I wouldn't be surprised in the future if he went, actually, do you know what, this isn't, I'm not going to get what I need to over the course of the whole season in F1. So actually, does it really matter if I miss one or two of these weekends to go and do the Le Mans, to do the Spa 24 hours or something like that? I honestly, he has so much pull, he could get away with it, because that's the other thing with this, that won't get into this too much because we'll talk about it more in a minute, but he's also unique in that he can do this kind of thing. That's one of the reasons why it's so rare, but he has the heft. He's got the means because it's his team, his car, it's his decision whether he wants to do it. And he does take it really seriously, because I remember interviewing him a couple of years ago and him talking me through kind of where he was at in terms of they were really seriously working out what car to pick, and then if you pick what car, like what team do you then work with? Does that limit your options and so on and so forth? So he has the means in terms of the racing team and everything else, and he's getting that experience to do it. But I think he also realistically has the power within Red Bull to be able to go and do stuff, even if it does mean compromising some of those F1 commitments.
It was notable in Baku when he was talking about all this after his first race. He was very clear that Helmut Marko, the very influential Red Bull Motorsport advisor, is right behind him on this. Marko's greatest career achievements in his own racing days were in sports car racing. So he's like, yeah, Helmut knows endurance. He loves it too. He's really up for this as well. So I doubt that would extend to even Helmut Marko saying, yeah, skip a couple of Grand Prix, even if Red Bull does struggle next year. And Max himself was very clear in saying, I don't know what 2026 will look like for the new rules, my team or whatever. Before he commits to Nürburgring next year, he wants to see what's required of him in F1 in terms of focus as much as anything else. But you don't get the impression Red Bull will stand in the way of anything much here.
Yeah, you can imagine there might be a scenario where if, let's say, he's in contention for the championship next year, and I know there's a lot of negativity about Red Bull with the new in-house power unit for next year, but it's not impossible. I suspect that might focus his attention a little bit more on F1 out of necessity, and also if you're employing him, that might be the point where you say, well, maybe let's just focus on this. But at the same time, there's plenty of evidence that this isn't making any difference to what he's doing. It's not distracting him. It's not tiring him out. He does sim racing on race weekends. I know there was a bit of talk about that being a distraction last year at some point, wasn't there? But he pretty quickly scotched that as a problem, and it's not a problem. So Verstappen's also very good at managing all of this kind of thing himself.
I think it's a very, very pure racing version of what happened with Lewis Hamilton a few years ago, when there were lots of questions about all of his extracurricular activities. And there was one weekend in particular, which I think was around this same time of year, when he ended up in Singapore, I think off the back of like a real whirlwind set of dates jetting between races and fashion shows, and then back to the UK and Monaco as well. And Hamilton always said that kind of stuff gave him a sort of release and distraction almost from F1, kept him grounded in the sense that, it made him enthusiastic for the F1 stuff because he had other stuff going on, and it didn't completely define him. Now, you could argue that since that competitive situation for Lewis has changed, that there'll be critics who believe that he should focus more on F1 instead of doing all this other stuff. But you can't be quite so selective with sort of when it works and when it doesn't. I think with Max, you could argue, if you were critical of it, and this was to your point, Ed, about the stuff that was emerging at the start of last year, is, are you making sure that you're well rested properly? Are you burned out in any way? If I can't imagine Max suffers from this given how much he does, but if you're anything like me and you get a migraine after spending 2.5 hours on the sim, you're absolutely useless for the rest of the evening and the next morning. So there are some small things that you would need to factor in. But I just think it sustains him almost. He's just got such an enthusiasm and love of driving, and his version of that has been sim racing for so long, because it's what he was raised on. But now that it's parlaying into sort of the real world activities, those are more inconvenient. Those are harder you can't just pop out in the middle of a Grand Prix weekend and do a 4-hour race or a 2-hour stint in a GT race or something like that, and then go back for the rest of the Grand Prix. I wouldn't put it past Max to try if he thought that logistically, if the race is lined up and the proximity was enough, I'm sure he would consider it. We know that he has done those big sim racing events around Grand Prix weekends before. I think he would need to make a choice. And I do think those ones that sort of fit into that desire of, what's he done in the virtual world? What would he back himself and his team and his teammates to do well in the real world? Because he does want to do it for fun, but for Max, fun is being competitive and doing something properly. So he's not going to go somewhere just because he's like, that'd be nice to do, and I don't mind if I finish 40th in that big field. I think he would. So he'd want to do it properly. He'd want to make sure he devotes himself properly to it. So I think that sort of GT arena and the big GT races is the obvious step, and then maybe bigger stuff in sports cars in terms of top class things in multi-tier categories and Le Mans and stuff like that is probably a post F1 exploit, but that maybe depends. It feels though like that's very much where his focus will be. I don't see him chasing more kind of outlandish pursuits. I don't see him turning up in oval racing and doing IndyCar or anything like that. He doesn't have something to prove in the way Alonso did, so I just don't see him trying to go out of his way to do the things that he thinks will look good on his CV. It's what he wants and what will appeal to him.
Yeah, he very specifically said in Baku as well, because straight away people were talking Triple Crown. It's almost like since Alonso, as soon as someone races somewhere else from F1, they're like, Triple Crown, you can do all of them. And he was like, I like watching IndyCar. I don't need to race it as well. And I think, the current IndyCar is 13 years old and not, the series is in a little bit of a mess about what it does next. I don't think it looks that appealing to drivers from outside, particularly at the moment, relatively. So the one he did mention as a serious prospect was Le Mans. He's been very clear that Le Mans is something that is on his mind for the future. Again, that's a clash for next year. But I don't think it's wrong to draw a big line between the facts that Red Bull is about to partner with Ford. Ford is creating a hypercar for Le Mans and the World Endurance Championship to enter in 2027. Red Bull Powertrains is one of the technical partners in this. Dan Sayers, a guy who was senior at Red Bull Powertrains, just moved over to the Ford hypercar project. Ford hypercar project will be based in Oxford, which is pretty close to Red Bull in Milton Keynes. Red Bull is not running that project by any means. It is an in-house Ford thing, but there are so many things tying those two together that there is a very obvious open door for when Max wants to do Le Mans 24 hours in a top class car to jump into a Ford hypercar, I would say.
It probably makes more sense to chase that than it does maybe move somewhere else in Formula One to a team that's maybe a bit more green than blue and also has a hypercar option, because I don't think the Aston Martin looks like a particularly... I mean, it's a gamble for an F1, so it doesn't look like a particularly fun car to go and pin your Le Mans hopes on either. So
did all right at the weekend, relatively, at Fuji. Had its most competitive yet. Despite the fact I ended up on a sports car-based podcast through following NLS at the weekend while I was also on a MotoGP shift, I'm the sports car skeptic usually among our team. I grew up watching Formula Ford and Rallycross. Sports car races are a bit long for my kind of teenage tastes. But it's a slightly sports car skeptic thing to say. Balance of performance means everyone gets a go at not being rubbish eventually. So that's
fair. I would just say that I like the theory of being part of that kind of... I don't know if he'd want to be in the Ford program like from the very start. Maybe he'd want to see it sort of get figured out first, and maybe be bad enough for long enough to get that BOP break just for the right time. You never know. Like the very 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 convenient timing of Ferrari's return and then immediately being successful at Le Mans, a proper Ford back in the top class at Le Mans with Max Verstappen at the wheel. The skeptic in me thinks that could bring some favourable BOP, especially if you play your cards right in the build-up in terms of how quick the car is in events leading up to it. If you give yourself a full season of being rubbish before that, and then Verstappen comes in, that works quite nicely, I suspect.
It would work in their favour, wouldn't it? I would say as well on that topic, chatting to Thibaut Vimont, our brilliant endurance racing correspondent, about this at the weekend. There is a little bit of scepticism in the sports car world about how well that Ford program will start as well. They feel like they're on a tight schedule with how little time between the car shaking down and actually racing. There's a bit of an eyebrow raised at Ford going almost entirely in-house when Porsche teamed up with Penske for their project. Ferrari's got its longtime partner AF Corsa. Most of them go to an outside GT/sports car specialist. So it's not a given, BOP aside, that the Ford Le Mans car will be a winner, but it's too good a story. And Verstappen's going to be an extremely valuable part of that project if he is part of it.
The one thing to note for that is it's not that easy to accommodate a guest driver, if you like, into a Le Mans program without fielding an extra car. Because if you remember when Nico Hülkenberg did it in 2015, we were there covering that race, weren't we, Scott? He won it with Nick Tandy and Earl Bamber. That was a third Porsche, so he wasn't, because you can't just say I'm Max Verstappen and boot a regular driver out, because they've got championships to fight for. They're professional, very high level drivers. But so you probably would need a third car, and then when there's the third car, you need to do the testing. You probably need to do Spa as well as a preparation event. There's the Le Mans test, etc., which you can get away with not doing. But it's quite tricky to accommodate. So that does create complexities. It's not just do the dates for Le Mans Clash; it's other things as well. So it's just worth remembering that. But I would be staggered if Max Verstappen does not contest the Le Mans 24 Hours in the medium term, let's put it that way. And who knows? He could well do Nürburgring, have success there, and just because he's going to do it, we assume there's a good chance he does it next year. Doesn't mean he's going to win it. He could, but it's a really tough race to win, and that will be the creme de la creme who will be racing there. That's a fiercely competitive race now, but I'm sure that will ignite his desire to do the other great 24-hour races.
Yeah, and I was just going to say one quick thing to add on that is, just to really underline the point, I would not be surprised if Max ticks off the major GT 24-hour races before the end of his F1 career. I think there's going to be two parts to Max's sports car commitments. There's going to be the stuff he can do while he's still active in F1, and then I think the really serious Le Mans bid or outright Le Mans bid or something like that, I think probably does have to come after he's out of F1, unless the stars align so perfectly, as you say, Ed, that he can do absolutely everything with the right program, with the right build-up, blah, blah, blah. But I think the full attack probably comes a little bit after. I still think Max will walk away from F1 a little bit early compared to what you might think in terms of his age and how well he's performing, because I think I think what he's done the last 12 months and what he's done this year with this GT program has really, really shown this. He is properly serious about doing the biggest endurance events he can while he still feels at the top of his game. Not because Max will have great respect for the people who are proper in this arena, not just very good for sports cars. Max will want to do it while he still feels like mega in himself, basically. So that's what I think supports him maybe calling time on F1 by the time he's in his very early 30s. But I think long before then, I think he will tick off major 24-hour races in GTs. I can absolutely see that happening while he's still an F1 driver.
It's also great for these events as well. It's great to get the attention on the Nürburgring. It's great to get more eyeballs on Le Mans. Sometimes when you get these sort of superstar drivers coming in, you do get a little bit of a negative reaction sometimes. But I remember being at Indy for 2 weeks in 2017 when Alonso was there, and there are a few little gripes from a couple of the regulars. But when you've got someone with that star power, it's all reflected glory, isn't it? It's like, yeah, you might be a bit annoyed that someone's come into your world and they're suddenly the big star having done nothing there. But it's great to get more attention and get a bit of reflected glory from F1. So I think if you're an organizer of anything, you should make sure that you embrace this and accommodate Max Verstappen, not accommodate him in favoritism way, but just if you've got some leeway in your calendars or whatever, it makes sense to try and make it work, because it's just going to be good for absolutely everybody in that ecosystem.
That's one of the things that really struck me about the NLS race. The reaction from the other drivers that I saw across social media was so positive, so welcoming. No, you can't play down what Max did, but no one was trying to even remotely do it. They were just delighted he was there, delighted he was enjoying himself and admiring his performance. Now, I think it was easier in that field where it wasn't super duper high quality necessarily, and he was with a kind of inexperienced teammate. I suspect if and when he's in like a 3-driver top level GT or hypercar team, there were people studying his lap times and being keen to like not underplay what the other drivers are doing. I do feel like anytime we were trying to, in previous years, trying to highlight exactly what Fernando Alonso was doing relative to his Toyota teammates or Nico Hulkenberg relative to his Porsche teammates, there would be kind of ultra diehard sports car loyalists who were just like, no, praise the other drivers and trying to play down what the F1 guest was doing. And I think I think you can praise what the guest is doing without playing down how good the regulars are at what they do and how good many of them were and could have been in F1 in some cases as well. But the other thing, so Nürburgring Nordschleife, of all the racetracks in the world, this is not one that necessarily needs more publicity. Everyone who likes driving cars fast knows about the Nordschleife, has either driven on it or would love to one day if they got the chance, because it is a racetrack that you can just go and take a road car out on and drive fast around. It's amazing. It's, I've never done it, but it's an incredible thing that a racetrack that iconic is one you just go and play on. It doesn't need publicity. However, if anything is going to get the Nordschleife to a wider audience, it's going to be someone like Max Verstappen turning up. Even for the Nürburgring, he's a useful publicity boost. And people watching the streams, there were so many people, so many thousands and thousands of people watching the stream of that race. Some of them probably watch it every time. Some of them were certain to be F1 fans who would not have even necessarily realised what the Nordschleife was, and certainly not that they could just go and have a play there if they fancied. So that reflected glory thing is strong, and it is good for the other championships. F1 these days has never had, I would say, such a big profile margin over everything else. I don't think that's entirely fair, but I'm not going to argue against it because it is just an absolute fact of an algorithm-driven world where popular things get more popular because you get fed the popular things some more. And the gap between what you like and what you get fed and something you don't know that exists yet is bigger than ever because of that. So someone like Max dipping into other worlds is brilliant for those other worlds in terms of getting more eyeballs on them. And I think sports car racing, GT racing in particular, is entertaining enough that it has got a chance to get some of those people, checking it out more after Max isn't there.
Right, Scott, there was a time when F1 drivers used to crop up in other categories of racing endlessly. It's been a few decades since that's been the case, admittedly. But can you see Verstappen inspiring a new trend?
That's really tricky because I think it will spark conversations about it. I think it will get some drivers thinking about what they'd like to do and what they'd like to try. You have other drivers in F1 now who have got the same or similar kinds of sim racing backgrounds and therefore exposure to other things like Max has had. Obviously, Norris is an obvious example. Gabriel Bortoleto, I think, has been quite big on doing more sim racing. Wasn't there some teasing of Verstappen earlier in the season with where Verstappen was giving Bortoleto a bit of a hard time because he was basically Bortoleto was trying to get up to speed and Verstappen's basically he's just better than him. So it's that kind of thing. So you could potentially have it where more of these drivers come through where they do this stuff. Therefore, they're exposed to it. And it's one of the great things about sim racing is it makes people realise how big and wonderful the world of racing is outside of the obvious stuff. As Matt was saying, when you have the really popular racing stuff shoved down your throat, it can be quite easy to realise. And excuse me, it's a bit like an early virtual exposure to the reality that's so like the sort of real classic thing of young drivers that wanted to be F1 drivers that got up to Formula 3 like 20 years ago and then realised that they weren't going to be able to take it any further. So then they're like, oh, I'm going to go and do GT racing. I'm going to go and do prototype racing. I'm going to do touring cars, that kind of stuff. It feels like the ability to be exposed to that comes a lot earlier now. So theoretically, you could have this generation of drivers and future generations come through more exposed. They see what Max does. They see that he has a load of fun. He tells everybody, this was mega. Everyone was great. This track's so much better in reality. You need to go and do it. And they want to talk about it, but they won't do it while they're active F1 drivers. I can think of Lewis Hamilton's the only driver immediately springing to mind where I think he has so much pull just as who he is that he could force it into a deal he does with a team to say, by the way, if I want to go and do something, you have to let me go and do it. I think someone like Charles Leclerc, for example, is such a coveted asset to Ferrari just from a he is their driver kind of thing. I think they just want to kind of control that. But Verstappen's become a bit of a law unto himself. The whole Red Bull organization is built around him. And this is what I was kind of getting at earlier, that pull that he has within Red Bull, the strength that he has, the desire they have to keep him, but the influence that he has over everything that they do means no one's really going to stand in his way, because it's always been about trying to keep Max happy. So he just has such a unique situation in which he's got more leverage than any other driver to go and do this. And I think that's going to be the key difference, because I can think of half a dozen drivers off the top of my head in F1. Like, and this may be just a little bit of like sort of all-rounder nepotism going on, but Carlos Sainz just feels like someone who is destined and just should be turning up and just being brilliant in lots of different things. But he's not. I mean, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong here, but didn't was Carlos in the zero car at the Monte Carlo Rally a few years ago?
Sure, he was. Yeah,
I think he did.
Yeah.
It feels like he should, but he's not, is he? Until he's done with F1. And that I think that for other drivers, and that's why the Max thing's so unique. I think other drivers would want to do it. They'd have the desire. They'd go and be brilliant if they went and did some of these things. I really struggle to see them doing it while they're active F1 drivers.
So what I think Max wants to change and will try to change with the people he's involved in and he influences, and I think he is someone who, as he becomes, he's not exactly old yet, but he's a F1 veteran, almost relatively, 10 years in now. He's going to have a lot of influence over young drivers, and he wants to have that influence as well. And he was saying in Baku how so many young drivers are very fixated on dreams of F1. And then eventually, when they know F1 isn't going to happen, they go and test a GT car or a hypercar and go, oh, this is great. I want to do this now. But they only do it then, when the F1 dreams collapse, and when they and their family and their sponsors have spent bazillions of euros on Formula 2 without getting anywhere. And Max was saying he's trying to encourage some of the drivers he influences to start doing this stuff earlier, do the GT test, go and play in a hypercar. Endurance racing, I know it's not simple to slot into a Le Mans program, but it is a discipline where you can drop in and be the additional driver in a long distance race. There are ways of doing that in endurance racing that there aren't in most other non-F1 series. And there are teams and manufacturers and sponsors and amateur drivers who need partners. There are ways of getting paid as well. And Max is like, this is a decent career. You could do this alongside your single-seater racing, and it gives you a backup, and you'll have loads of fun. And he's really heavily encouraging people to do that. Makes me think of Felipe Drugovich, F2 champion, 3 years ago now? It's a while, isn't it? Who's hung around on the cusp of F1 forever, almost getting an Aston Martin for a race repeatedly as like Alonso or Stroll hurt themselves or got ill, then got better at the last minute, and they're still never started a Grand Prix. It felt like he was repeatedly turning down chances to go and race something else that seemed to be dangling in front of him, because he was so fixated on an F1 deal that I think most of us felt was probably, as good as he looked in F2, never going to happen. He's finally kind of admitted defeat now and signed for Andretti in Formula E for next season, where I think he'll probably be excellent and go on and have a very good career there, although Jake Dennis is quite a tough teammate to beat. But Jake Dennis, great example, actually somebody did start going down different routes earlier in his career, and now he's a world champion in Formula E, well, staying involved in F1 through Red Bull Simwork. So, yeah, Verstappen's trying to just give people a bit more career balance, a bit more career sustainability. It's not all about, hey, this is fun, come and win some big races. It's like, this could mean that you actually still make a living out of racing at a time when maybe you wouldn't otherwise.
Yeah, I always remember years ago when I was involved in the McLaren Autosport BRDC Award, and speaking to one of the young drivers who was doing the evaluation tests across multiple cars, and one of them was a front-wheel drive touring car. And I just remember him saying, "Do you know, I always thought that sort of car would be of no interest and terrible, but having driven it, I'd sign tomorrow to race that, basically, because it just does open the eyes." So yeah, I think that's good that's on Max's mind as well. But it's interesting to wonder, Scott, because if I was an F1 team boss, I wouldn't be letting my driver go and do other things, not only because you're invested heavily in them being fully focused and fully fit and not injured, and there is a risk of injury, particularly if you go to a circuit like the Nordschleife, but also there's all the commercial things. Verstappen was racing a Ferrari, which is a rival. So there's lots of commercial realities, and it's not just automotive companies, but clash of sponsors, all sorts of things that can create difficulty. So there's not many, as you say, there's many reasons why they won't have the leeway. But it'd be really interesting to know how many, if it was completely free, how many actually would, because there'll be some that would, but I don't think there's actually that many who have just the sheer absolute love of driving that Verstappen does.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. It's that you have to be in that sweet spot of enjoying driving, wanting to drive, wanting to race, wanting to be competitive, having the means to step into a team, having the pull to get there. Like that's like probably half a dozen. It's like the most complex Venn diagram I can think of. But there's like 6 different things there, and Max is probably the only one who sits in the middle of all of it. I mean, in terms of who would like want to just go and do different things, I think Norris would. I think Norris would. I'm actually not sure about Piastri. I just like Piastri just feels like he's so utterly laid back and relaxed about everything. I feel like he could just kind of take or leave everything that isn't just focus on doing what he can to be Formula One world champion. And I don't mean that in a critical way. It's kind of hard to get a read of where that enthusiasm is. And then there's just some who just, it's really hard to picture someone like I can't picture Charles Leclerc doing anything other than being an F1 driver. I don't see it. Whereas, like I said, someone like Carlos Sainz, I think, yeah, like why aren't you rocking up and doing other bits? I don't know if you've seen the video of Liam Lawson with one of the various Red Bull antics that they have the drivers get up to in a rally car, and like absolutely like his first run, like the first 3 or 4 turns that he does on this short stage is really tentative, and you sort of get the impression of like, oh god, this is going to be embarrassing at the end of it. He's going to be so far off this reference time. And then basically by about 20 seconds into the stage, he's stopped basically crapping his pants and he's like actually going for it. And he's absolutely on it. And then by the time he does his second or third run, I can't remember which one it is, like he's really leaning on it. And when you see something like that, you see one, this kid's got so much enthusiasm for this specific thing, but also even like I don't think Lawson is an absolute megastar. I think he can be a good Grand Prix driver and he can have a good Grand Prix career. But you see them step in and do something like that, having never been in the rally car before, and you think, oh, you're just bloody mega. Like all of you, and you've said this so many times, Ed. Like even the quote unquote bad F1 drivers are really, really good racing drivers and just really good peddlers. So then you think, actually, do you know what? Like, all of you could probably go and do this if you wanted to, but where's that kind of limit? So Lawson's someone, you see what he's done throughout his career so far, and I just think, like, you'll just go and race anything. Like, as soon as the option comes up, I think Lawson would step into something. Can I imagine Yuki Tsunoda in anything other than Formula One? Not really, but that's partly because it's really hard to sort of picture Tsunoda kind of doing anything other than just really, really, really trying to impress Red Bull in a Formula One environment. So it is hard. It's hard to identify the drivers that find it. But I feel like it's a bit of a, like you kind of know, like if someone just said an F1 driver's name to you, you'd know if are they dead keen to go and do something. Like Nico Hülkenberg, no. He had his chance.
Now, yeah.
He had a chance. He had a great chance to go and build a non-F1 career. Wasn't interested in it. So I just don't see it. So that's another example there. He just doesn't fall into that category.
Well, it's interesting. The other day in Baku, I think Liam Lawson mentioned he loved his GT3 experience, obviously racing the DTM, which nowadays is the GT3 series, finished second a few years ago. Whereas Alex Albon mentioned it and he said, I didn't enjoy it so much. He won one race, but he didn't have quite so much success. So, yeah, it's interesting to see how different drivers respond to it.
Yeah, Lawson was great in the DTM. That actually was quite pivotal to his career ending up where it did. Leclerc, I feel like because Ferrari's got a very successful hypercar and Monaco is quite near France, very near France, there's like a sort of inevitability that Leclerc will one day race a Ferrari hypercar at Le Mans in people's minds. But I just don't, like you, Scott, I can't picture it actually happening or Leclerc moving his focus far enough to do what's needed for that or wanting to really. Whereas, do you remember how prolific Norris was on where he was turning up during COVID series? He was everywhere. Like there was a famous online Indy 500 where he massively upset Simon Pagenaud, and he did some of the supercars races as well, didn't he? So I can totally imagine that sim world race anything element of Norris coming out in the real world. But
he's done Daytona as well, hasn't he? Like he's actually done Daytona. Obviously before
sharing with Fernando Alonso.
Yes, you're right.
Before he was an F1 driver, was in his was that the start of his F2 season? Or it was, wasn't it?
It was 2018, wasn't it? Because I remember I went out there for the test. So it was, it was those two and Phil Hansen sharing the United car.
And of course, United, exactly. Given Zach Brown's involvement in United Autosports, McLaren having a hypercar on the way in partnership with United Autosports, there's tons of stuff kicking around that Lando could race outside F1 if he fancied, but I can't see that happening until he's actually won an F1 title, because that's quite a significant difference between where he is mindset-wise and where Verstappen is.
Yeah, I think overall, it's just great that Verstappen is leveraging his position to do it, and it's created some great storylines. I think it's good for Formula One as well, even though there may be those at Formula One saying somebody else getting attention, we don't like that. But I think it's just good for everybody. So the more we can see this kind of thing, even though it's very difficult, the better as far as I'm concerned. Well, thanks very much, Scott and Matt, for jumping on to chat all things Verstappen. I'm sure it's not the last we'll be talking about Verstappen in GT3 and indeed endurance racing action. But next time we'll be turning our attention back to full-time F1 and chatting about Fernando Alonso. So stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.